2020 has given us some monster survival games, and there's still some on their way. Hi folks, it's Falcon. Today on gameranx, the top 10 new survival games in 2020. Going to start off with a quick disclaimer. When we say survival, we're not saying survival horror. So games like Resident Evil 3 and System Shock, they're not what we're talking about. They're great games, don't get me wrong, but we're talking purely survival games here today. That in mind, let's get started with number 10, which is Windbound. So where Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was kind of a, honestly, fairly traditional Zelda game with a lot of extra elements to it that made it into something that was bigger than the sum of its parts, Windbound is a lot along the lines of a survival game that brings in Zelda as kind of that same type of element. Obviously, aesthetically, it's very similar, but we're talking about a much more survival-oriented game here. Now, you might notice the water and boats and all of that, and that might make you take note that they're drawing a little influence not just from Breath of the Wild, but also from Wind Waker. Honestly, the idea of moving from island to island, gathering resources, and doing survival stuff in a kind of Zelda-like, with a lot of roguelite, action-adventure, but primarily survival elements, I think sounds like a recipe for something very cool. Winbound is coming August 28th to PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and PC. I think it's probably going to be a good game. It really looks cool to me. At number 9 is the Riftbreaker, which is primarily a survival game, but also has you doing base building and, believe it or not, action RPG. Kind of bullet hell, kind of hack and slash. Obviously, primarily, the idea here is to build a base, to secure resources, and to keep everything going. It's a survival game, that's the point. But if you download the demo, which you can right now, it is actually a really exciting game too, which I think, while survival games often have exciting elements, this really generally seems like everything going on is important and you have to do it quickly. That is to say, I really enjoy the urgency that the Riftbreaker brings to the table. Now, the full game is not out yet. It still has a release date of quote-unquote sometime in 2020. But again, you can play the demo right now and it's really enjoyable. Give it a shot. I don't think you'll regret it. At number 8 is Occupant Mars, the game, which describes itself pretty well in the title, to be clear. The point is, you're supposed to colonize Mars, and that means surviving on it, which means exploring, setting up farms, setting up machinery, setting up habitable places, and living in it. You start with a certain amount of supplies, you have to get to the point of self-sustenance, and then from there, you have to expand. Now, a lot of this is kind of open world sandbox, but the primary thing you have to do is survive in this game. Now, the full game is not out. There is, however, the Occupy Mars prologue, which just came out a few days ago. I mean, that involves more than just like having food. You're also worried about being dehydrated, because obviously the big key to having life on Mars would be, in fact, water. And a lot of your activities in the game revolve around that and solving that problem. It's a pretty game, and it is under continued development, so if you play it and there's something you maybe don't like, the devs are actually really responsive, so make sure they find out about it, because they have integrated a lot of player feedback from the demo to this prologue they've released. The full release date is still to be determined, but I mean, this is a really cool game, and it continues to be more and more intriguing, as well as genuinely beautiful. Like, it is a beautiful take on Mars. At number 7 is the Eternal Cylinder, one that, I mean, it's about as weird as it looks in concept. So it is, in every way, an open-world survival adventure game with this one gimmick. There's always going to be this massive cylinder that destroys everything, and the point is, of course, preventing that, or at least delaying it. You're in control of these weird-looking creatures. They're called trebums. I may be pronouncing it incorrectly, but all of the typical survival stuff is at play here, with the addition that you can grow your herd, as well as take on other forms. It's also weird and beautiful in an otherworldly way. It looks kind of like a surrealist painting at any given moment, and is definitely a different take that, despite the fact you literally control aliens, isn't alienating. A release date has not yet been determined, but it's supposed to come out this year still, so that's why we're talking about it. At number 6 is Wild, an open world survival game, which is actually set in a prehistoric time period. You play as a human, you can possess animals to, let's say, spy on others or fight against another tribe. It's also a really lavish looking game. Like everything's just big, open, pretty, epic looking. And honestly, the possession of the animals seems like perhaps some of the more interesting gameplay. Like one of the examples shown when they showed this game off originally was a pack of cannibals were sort of rallying with each other, and the player used crows that they possessed to kind of distract them and confuse them, and then rode in on a bear and kicked the crap out of them. Like honestly, it's really, really cool looking. Between that kind of gameplay and the survival elements, I think it has a lot of potential to kind of create gameplay that you might not even necessarily see anywhere else, and that's always a very good thing. It's a PS4 exclusive, and we haven't heard anything about it for a really long time, and we don't have a release date yet, so it may not be a PS4 exclusive, may end up being a PS5 game, but I'm hoping we do get to see it before the PS5 personally, because it's one of those games that I just really want to experience. At number 5 is the Survivalists, which is basically like an adventure sandbox survival game. Obviously, the emphasis is on survival for this list, but it's a game that manages to take the aesthetic of a lot of older games, your old JRPGs specifically, and look like something new but also familiar. It's also set in the Escapists universe, in case you're familiar with that. There is a demo available now, but a lot of what you're doing is going around, getting resources, building a base, making food, staying alive, etc., etc. A lot of crafting, a lot of procedurally generated wilderness, and of course, some good multiplayer and some good dungeon crawling. Honestly, it's a formula for something to do with friends that is really enjoyable, and from what I've played in the demo, I really look forward to the full game. That's coming Q4 of 2020. At number 4 is Grounded. Grounded is basically the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids as a survival game. And let's just be 100% clear, that's a great idea. It's hard for me actually to come up with an idea that sounds better than that. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was always something that as a kid I would watch and be like, wow, it'd be really cool if this was a video game. And I don't remember if they actually ever tried that, but that was definitely a potential that was never actually realized. And that might actually even be because the genre of survival didn't exist at that point. I mean, huge bugs, massive fauna, the ability to build these goofy little forts. I mean, it's literally perfect. It's out in early access right now. It's one of those games that just completely plays exactly like the concept of it makes it sound. Give it a shot. I genuinely really enjoy this game. At number 3 is Survivalist Invisible Strain, which is a sort of comic book look survival game that kind of reminds me of a simplified and yet pretty open-ended version of a lot of traditional survival games. It is a zombie game. You do have to fight zombies, but you also have to survive in the wilderness. Honestly, it's in early access, so it's got a little ways to go. It's only $6.99 though, and it's definitely worth that. Check it out. At number 2 is Away, the survival series. It is really taking inspiration from somewhere I think we don't really see game developers talk about ever, which is nature documentaries. I mean, excluding The Last of Us, which was kind of inspired by a fungus documentary. That's pretty much the only other instance I can think of. This is much more along the lines of literally sort of translating that experience into a playable one. It's also absolutely gorgeous on a level that is hard to describe. You play as a sugar glider, which means you do a lot of cool stuff that when I said this game plays like a nature documentary, you probably said, maybe not. No, you're jumping around in trees and fighting and gliding, and honestly, it's really cool. They do not have a demo or anything, and they don't have a release date, so really all we have to go off of is footage, but the footage is extremely intriguing to me. I think it's something that could potentially be really good. And finally, at number 1 is Deadside, which is a game that came to early access back in April and has gradually given itself a pretty good reputation. This is in a lot of ways along the lines of DayZ, except much better. Like, the graphics are a lot better, AI is way better, not even close as a matter of fact. But at the moment, we're still at a point where there's not a massive amount of content in the game. That's the only real criticism. Other than that, this is a really, really potentially great open-ended DayZ-like game that goes above and beyond the original scope. I suspect as the map becomes more and more open, or to just say it the right way, done, it is going to end up being a pretty formidable contender in that genre because honestly, it's just a really good game. It works, it's fun. But what are you planning on playing? Any of the games off of this list? Or maybe another that you thought about? Leave us a comment, let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable all notifications when you do. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.